Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our event, Insights in Antarctica. This event marks the 200th anniversary of the first recorded sighting of Antarctica. The event is funded by Antarctica Heritage Trust, who are celebrating this year 200 years of discovery through arts and culture. So thank you to them for the grant. It's also part funded by the Royal Academy of Engineering because we're weaving in our current focus on sound, but we're linking the two, so that should be interesting. So my name's Anita Shervington and I'm the director of Blast Fest. Blast is a pop-up festival that fuses the creative power of science with Black arts and culture, and we use that as a force for change in our community. So we normally pop up at Caribbean carnivals, museums, community centres and other cultural events to engage the public with STEAM through culturally responsive ways. So today, in line with what we normally do, we are honouring contributions from Black and other underrepresented explorers on this occasion. And we have three excellent speakers, but we're going to start with Natty Mark Samuels, who is the founder of the African School in Oxford. Natty founded the school in 2009 with a remit to deliver African studies to the general public. Natty teaches across a variety of settings, including schools, community centres, museums, youth clubs, and universities. He also produces the Kabitu, I hope I said that right, which is a bi-monthly newsletter of the African School. And he also recently expanded the school's library into the African Studies by Bicycle initiative, which he set up in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So Natty's talk is called Africans as well as Admonson, Black Exploration in the Arctic, which focuses on the journey of Alado Equiano and includes readings from excerpts of his biography. So let's hear from Natty.
Greetings, dear listener. Welcome to Africans as well as Amundsen. When we talk about Arctic exploration, we always think first of all of people like Amundsen and Scott. We never think of people like Henson or Washington Gibbs. These were guys who also went to the Arctic, but in the climate of the day, their ventures weren't recognized. It was always their white counterpart who was celebrated and paid homage to. The Black explorers were always somewhat disregarded. Henson wasn't lauded until after his death. Washington Gibbs, his happened towards the end of his life, not when he was actually a younger man, when he was out and about. Today, we're going to look at someone called Olaudah Equiano, who you will know as one of the famous anti-slavery activists. Now, in his autobiography, he tells us that he was born in Nigeria, of the Igbo people in Benin. So I need to make a distinction there, because most people, when you say Benin, they think of the country Benin, formerly called Dahomey, but he's actually from Benin City, which was in Nigeria. And the people of Benin, the Edo people, are famous as brass casters, amongst their other creative accomplishments. Okay, so before we go and explore this journey, let's just say something about the Igbo, because most people, when they encounter people from Nigeria in this country, they tend to be Yoruba, who we know come from southwest Nigeria. The Igbo are the main ethnicity in southeast Nigeria. And as far as I'm concerned, they have produced some of the outstanding people of the last century. For instance, Ben Nwanwu, the artist, he gave us a tutu. Now, when we think of great paintings of women, most people think of Mona Lisa. Well, the Nigerians have their own kind of iconic female figure, and she's called Tutu. or the painting is called Tutu, and it's a painting of an African princess, and this was painted by Ben Nwanwu. Another great artist, Uche Okeke. So he's known for taking this traditional form of art, which was used as a body decoration and for exterior house decoration, and he actually transferred it to the canvas. This is called uli. Okay, another character is Demas Unwoko, an architect who used a lot of kind of local building materials and kind of dug back into the history of Nigerian architecture to come up with his contemporary designs. And lastly, I'd like to mention Christopher Okigbo, poet, who's probably the most anthologized of all the African poets. And if we look on the diaspora, there's a man called Blyden. When we think of Pan-Africanism, we tend to think first of people like Garvey and Du Bois and such people, and Nkrumah. Well, long before them, in the 19th century, there was Edward Blyden, who came from originally from St. Thomas, went to America thinking to become a minister. He was refused entrance in 3 theological seminaries. And then after that, he said, well, screw America, and looked towards Africa, and spent the rest of his life there, mainly in Liberia, but he also resided in Nigeria and also in Sierra Leone. So there's 6 people that I've given you as far as the Igbo are concerned. Okay, Oludale Equiano, he took this journey in 1773 under the command of someone who's legendary as far as the British Navy is concerned, a guy called Phipps. This was 1773. They left Deptford in June. The Deptford docks is famous because this is where Drake was knighted. This is where Walter Raleigh set off on his explorations. Also Horatio Nelson, who we will also come to again in this story. So the Deptford docks was one of the kind of big naval docks of the past. So the ship left there, went down the Thames, came out on the river Medway, stopped in Sheerness, which is another of the naval docks, and then out into the North Sea, going north. And then we hear that kind of they went to the Shetland Islands, which are just north of Scotland. There's you know, northern part of Scotland, and then you've got the Orkney Islands, and then above the Orkney Islands are the Shetland Islands. Now the Shetland Islands was integral to any kind of Arctic exploration, because this is where they would kind of set off to go further north. So they would either take on extra crew, take on sheep, which they would use to eat along the way, and also ganses. Ganses were the legendary jumpers which all the guys wore, whether they were out fishing or whether they're out whaling, whether they were out on Arctic exploration. The Ganzi was probably one of the most important items of wear. So we hear that kind of from the Shetlands, we hear that he went to Greenland, and I'm just going to read you what he says when he enters Greenland. On 28th of June, being in latitude 78, we made Greenland, where I was surprised to see the sun did not set. The weather now became extremely cold, and as we sailed between north and east, which was our course, we saw many very high and curious mountains of ice, and also a great number of very large whales, which used to come close to our ship,
and blow the water up to a very great height in the air. He doesn't mention which whales were there, but the kind of whales that you would find in that region were like the beluga whales, the bowhead whales, and the narwhal. Now the narwhal is a whale that's got the long kind of, which is actually a tooth, which is last long sharp point. So from there they go on, and then he talks about polar bears, and this is where Nelson comes in. Horatio Nelson was a teenager at the time, I think maybe 14, 15, you know, just starting out of his naval career. And it's a shame because this is probably the most famous aspect of that expedition, is that he was almost killed fighting a polar bear. And Phipps, who was the commander of the expedition, gives one of the first kind of descriptions of a polar bear. And I'm just going to read something else that Equiano says specifically about the polar bears. Okay, so remember that they left in June, left Deptford, and so this is on the 29th and 30th of July, we saw one continued plain of smooth, unbroken ice, bounded only by the horizon. And we fastened to a piece of ice that was 8 yards, 11 inches thick. We had generally sunshine and constant daylight, which gave cheerfulness and novelty to the whole of this striking, grand, and uncommon scene. And to heighten it still more, the reflection of the sun from the ice gave the clouds a most beautiful appearance. We killed many different animals at this time, and among the rest, 9 polar bears. Though they had nothing in their pouches but water, yet they were all very fat. We used to decoy them to the ship sometimes by burning feathers or skins. I thought them coarse eating, but some of the ship's company relished them very much. And one thing I'd like to say, like when we go back to Nelson, like we don't really know what Nelson done on that journey, and yet Equiano done so much. So a part of his role was water purification. So they would take the water from the sea, and through a process, they would purify the water so the crew could drink. Another thing that he was involved in was collecting zoological specimens. So I asked myself, you know, he done so much, and yet he's not really mentioned, and yet we hear of Nelson because he had this kind of fisticuffs with this polar bear. Anyway, we go on north, and we hear that they kind of went north of Norway and past Svalbard, and ended up in the 7 islands. Now, this is a region where basically they didn't go any further because the ice just kind of encroached on them, and they couldn't go any further. And I'd just like to read what he says about the expedition, because this is when they hit dire straits. We remained hereabouts until the 1st of August, when the 2 ships got completely fastened in the ice, occasioned by the loose ice that set in from the sea. This made our situation very dreadful and alarming, so that on the 7th day, we were in very great apprehension of having the ship squeezed to pieces. The officers now held a council to know what was best for us to do in order to save our lives, and determined that we should endeavour to escape by dragging our boats along the ice towards the sea, which, however, was farther off than any of us thought. This determination filled us with extreme dejection and confounded us with despair, for we had very little prospect of escaping with life. However, we saved some of the ice about the ships to keep it from hurting them, and thus kept them in a kind of pond. We then began to drag the boats as well as we could towards the sea, but after 2 or 3 days' labour, we made very little progress, so that some of our hearts totally failed us, and I really began to give up myself for lost when I saw our surrounding calamities. While we were at this hard labour, I once fell in a pond we had made amongst some loose ice, and was very near being drowned. But providentially, some people were near who gave me immediate assistance, and thereby I escaped drowning. Our deplorable condition, which kept up the constant apprehension of our perishing in the ice, brought me gradually to think of eternity in such a manner as I had never done before. I had the fears of death hourly upon me, and shuddered at the thoughts of meeting the grim king of terrors in the natural state I then was in, and was exceedingly doubtful of a happy eternity if I should die in it. I had no hopes of my life being prolonged for any time, for we saw that our existence could not be long on the ice after leaving the ships, which are now out of sight and some miles from the boats. Our appearance now became truly lamentable. Pale dejection seethed as every countenance. Many who had been before blasphemers in this our distress began to call on the good God of heaven for his help. And in a time of our utter need, he heard us, and against hope or human probability delivered us. It was the 11th day of the ships being thus fastened, and the 4th of our drawing the boats in this manner, that the wind changed to the ENE. The weather immediately became mild, and ice broke towards the sea, which was to the southwest of us. Many of us on this got on board again, and with all our might, we hove the ships into every open water we could find, and made all the sail on them in our power. And now, having a prospect of success, we made signals for the boats and the remainder of the people. This seemed to us like a reprieve from death, and happy was the man who could first get on board of any ship or the first boat he could meet. We then proceeded in this manner till we got into the open water again, which we accomplished in about 30 hours to our infinite joy and gladness of heart.
So, I mean, that was a very perilous aspect. And Phipps wrote a best-selling book about the expedition, because this was the first British polar expedition. I've never read it, but I wonder if Equiano was mentioned in it. I asked that because where they stopped, so there's Norway and there's Svalbard, and in that region there's these 7 islands, and these 7 islands are named after explorers. So there's one that's named after, one of the islands is named after Nelson, one of the islands is named after Phipps, who led the expedition. So why isn't there one named after Equiano? You know, he done so much, you know, kind of with the water purification, the search for zoological specimens. You know, he's the first black person to ever reach the pole, and yet no island is named after him. One thing I would like to say is, although the expedition was deemed unsuccessful because they didn't get to the North Pole, one of the things they did, or they can say was a success, is that they were the first ones to name the ivory gull, a member of the gull family, and they were the first ones to name it and classify it. So they come down from, they can't go any further, and so they basically make the return journey. So they come down through the seas, the North Sea, Sheerness, and back into Deptford. So this was a 4-month journey. All the other ones happened after, but this was the first ever British exploration of the Arctic regions, which happened in 1773 between June and September. So as I say, you'll always hear the names of Amundsen and Scott, but please remember Oladau, Equiano. I think that one of the reasons why his contribution has been somewhat dismissed is because all of the other work he done, you know, in the anti-slavery movement, and his book became
Okay, brilliant, Natty, as usual, providing us with hidden history. So we always learn something new through Natty's contribution. So thank you so much for that. I also want to say thank you to the Black Geographers group, Celia in particular, because I liaised with Celia to find people actually that could contribute to this event. And so our next contributor is Kimberly Aiken, who is native of South Carolina. She's an early career polar professional focusing on Arctic and Antarctic policy, Indigenous sovereignty, stakeholder engagement, and diversity and inclusion in the polar community. Currently, she's pursuing efforts to facilitate discussion on developing accountability structures and policies that ensure inclusiveness, equity, and diversification of Black, Indigenous, and people of colour in Arctic and Antarctic policy, research, and science. I want to say shout out to Daryl as well, who's listening from California, where Kimberly is. And Kimberly's talk is called Reclaiming Polar History. Her talk highlights the journeys of Indigenous Alaskan American Ada Blackjack and African American explorers Miss Barbara Hillary and Matthew Henson. So let's hear Kimberly's talk.
Hello everyone, my name is Kimberly Aiken and I am a polar early career professional, and I'm pleased to record this presentation on reclaiming polar history, Indigenous and African American explorers in the Arctic and Antarctic. In a bit of an overview of this presentation, we'll begin with an introduction to myself and work I've done previously and my interests, looking at the Arctic versus the Antarctic, their differences and similarities between landmass and their oceans, the wildlife, inhabitants, and Arctic Indigenous people, Indigenous Arctic explorer Ada Blackjack, and Black polar explorers Matthew Henson, George W. Gibbs Jr., Barbara Hillary, and Lugi Nuchi. So a bit about myself. I am a native of Orangeburg, South Carolina, that's located in the southeast of the United States of America. I have a Master's of Arts in International Environmental Policy from the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey in Monterey, California. Previously, I've held a position as a graduate research assistant under the executive director of the Study of Environmental Arctic Change, known as SEARCH. I was also an Arctic policy intern for the German Arctic office of the Alfred Wegener Institute in Potsdam, Germany. And my most recent position I held was a polar and climate research assistant at Grid Arendal, located in Arendal, Norway, or more famously known as Arendelle from the movie Frozen. I was this year's Arctic Frontiers Student Forum Masters recipient to the Arctic Frontiers Conference that takes place annually in Tromsø, Norway. I was a 2019 Center for the Blue Economy Fellow, and I am affiliated with a number of Arctic organizations, but more particularly with the Interagency Arctic Research Policy Community, also known as IARPIC, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Working Group, Health and Wellbeing, and Science to Policy Communication Working Groups. I am what I consider a social and political researcher, and I am interested in Arctic and Antarctic policy, Indigenous sovereignty, self-determination, stakeholder engagement, and diversity and inclusion in the polar community. And I am especially interested in debunking what it means to be a scientist or a researcher, because I believe that we are all scientists and researchers in our own regard, and that at different times one does not need to have a PhD or a master's degree to have knowledge about ways of knowing your community, your environment, and what is needed to maintain one's language, self-determination, and to mitigate climate change and any issues that may be impacting your community. I will say a few words about the differences between the Arctic versus the Antarctic. The Arctic region, the map to the left of the screen, includes the Arctic Ocean, which is covered by a thin layer of returning sea ice and surrounded by land. The settlement area of the Arctic is divided between 8 countries: Canada, the United States, Russia, Finland, Sweden, Norway, Iceland, and Denmark with respect to Greenland. All the above-mentioned countries, except Iceland, have indigenous peoples living within their Arctic territory. There are varying definitions of the Arctic. This is meant to describe different aspects of the Arctic region. For example, there is the tree line definition, where the landscape is frozen and dotted with shrubs and lichen. At different times, the Arctic can be defined based on temperature. This includes locations based on high latitudes where average daily summer temperatures are 10 degrees Celsius or 50 degrees Fahrenheit. When not referring to temperature or the tree line, the region is most commonly defined as the region above the Arctic Circle, which is an imaginary line that circles the globe at 66 degrees latitude, 34 degrees longitude north of the equator. This is not represented here in the Arctic map used in this presentation. To the right of the screen, we see Antarctica. Antarctica, on the other hand, is a continent covered by a very thick ice cap and surrounded by a rim of sea ice in the Southern Ocean. 98% of Antarctica is covered. Continuing with differences between the Arctic and the Antarctic, I begin with wildlife in talking about the polar bear. The polar bear is known as the king of the Arctic and the region's most fierce predator. I begin with the polar bear to distinguish the difference between wildlife in the Arctic and wildlife in Antarctica. The polar bear can only be found in the Arctic, but there are many other mammals and species found across the circumpolar north. For example, other large land animals found across the Arctic include the Arctic fox, the Arctic hare, caribou, reindeer, moose, elk, brown bears, musk oxen, the snow owl, and a large variety of large marine mammals, including 5 different species of seals, narwhals, beluga whales, walruses, and other migratory whales such as orcas and gray whales. There is also loads of vegetation, berries, low-level ecosystem species, fishery abundance such as Arctic char, salmon, cod, and a host of migratory bird species. Just as polar bears are found only in the Arctic, penguins are found only in Antarctica. Antarctica's wildlife is just as vast and varied as the wildlife in the Arctic. Antarctic sea life includes 5 different penguin species, 5 different seal species, with the leopard seal being the fiercest, a host of bird species including the albatross, and migratory whales such as the orcas, humpbacks, blue whale, and the southern white whale. The Antarctic is also very popular for fishing, particularly for Antarctic krill, also known as shrimp, which congregates in large schools and is the keystone species or lifeline of the ecosystem of the Southern Ocean and forms the basis of the Antarctic food web. Antarctic krill is an important food for whales, seals, squid, icefish, penguins, albatrosses, and many other bird species, and also human beings. Most of the migratory animals are seasonal visitors to Antarctica as the weather conditions are too harsh in the winter months. There are approximately 13.1 million people living in the circumpolar north. Of that, 1 million are indigenous people, or 9% of the total population in the Arctic is indigenous, spanning 3 continents, 7 countries, and 30 million square kilometers. Arctic indigenous peoples include the Sami in circumpolar areas of Finland, Sweden, Norway, and northwest Russia, Neenix, Khanty, Evik, and Chukchi in Russia, Aleut, Yupik, and Inuit, Inupiat in Alaska, Inuit, Inuvialut in Canada, and Inuit Qaliit in Greenland. There are also 40 different ethnic groups, and a variety of cultural, historical, and economical backgrounds among the indigenous groups include reindeer herding, arts and craftsmanship, tourism, fishing, film, music, artists, researchers, scientists, and traditional knowledge storytellers. Arctic indigenous language, culture, self-determination, traditional lifestyle, Inuit traditional tattooing, health and well-being, and food security are a few topics of great importance with recognition as such within the United Nations through the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Peoples, and many other organizations. As one Indigenous woman once said, Arctic Indigenous people are a thriving people who are community-made, family-made, land-made, and ancestral-made. We are made up of everything and everyone that made it possible to exist outside of just ourselves. So to recap the differences and similarities between the Arctic versus the Antarctic, we've learned that the Arctic is surrounded by 8 countries. It sits at the top of the world and has a vast bit of tundra, including flowers, vegetation, grassland, and mountains. Greenland has the largest ice cap in the Arctic and the second largest ice cap in the world. The Arctic region is also filled with a vast, diverse cultural groups of human inhabitants with both large land and marine animals, and is warming faster than the Antarctic. Antarctica is a continent surrounded by an ocean. It sits at the bottom of the world. It has little to no tundra, no vegetation, grassland, shrub or trees, and most of the mountains are ice covered. Antarctica also has the largest ice cap in the world. Antarctica has no permanent residents, only researchers and scientists, and occasionally tourists who are fortunate enough to visit the continent. Travel to both regions are quite expensive, but the trip is intrinsically rewarding. Though during the winter months in Antarctica, one should be sure to dress warm and comfortably, as temperatures can reach a whopping negative 128 degrees Fahrenheit or negative 89 degrees Celsius. Icicles are sure to form on your bunny slippers, kids, if you're not careful to dress warmly. Similarly, but certainly more manageable, Arctic temperatures in winter can reach a negative 75 degrees Fahrenheit or negative 59 degrees Celsius in Siberia. Antarctica is international territory, and matters concerning governance or policy is managed by the parties to the Antarctic Treaty System. The Antarctic Treaty System was signed on December 1, 1959, and officially entered into force on June 23, 1961. There are 12 signatory countries with significant interest in Antarctica, and together they have established over 55 Antarctic research stations. The Commission for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources, also known as CAMLAR, was established in 1982 with the sole objective of conserving Antarctic marine life. There are many organizations and institutions at both the national and international level that administer the regulatory framework for the Arctic region. But one significant institution is the Arctic Council. It is comprised of 6 working groups dedicated to understanding and implementing emergency response and preparedness, protection of the marine environment, sustainable development and health and well-being, and contaminants, and 6 Arctic indigenous peoples groups representing Arctic indigenous people. Here is a map of Spruce Creek, Nome, Alaska, home to the indigenous Arctic explorer and survivor, Ada Blackjack. Ada Blackjack, originally Ada Delectuke from Spruce Creek, Nome, Alaska, was an Alaskan Inupiaq seamstress born in 1898 in a small outskirts settlement of the Nome census area that is now today entirely depopulated. She is the Arctic Queen explorer who became the only survivor of an all-male Arctic expedition to Siberia in 1923. She is not your typical traditional explorer. She had little to no wilderness training, but was skilled in domestic arts of sewing, cooking white folk food, Western-style housekeeping, and the English language. She was given the job on the expedition for which her skills could be used. Upon the death of her 4 male Arctic explorers, she spent 3 months in human isolation, where she became remarkably resourceful. She managed to replace the crew's boat, which had been destroyed in a storm, by building a new one out of animal skins, canvas, and driftwood. She made next a raised platform for spotting polar bears at a distance, and she taught herself to do all the things her all-male crew did not have the experience enough to do to survive the expedition. She practiced shooting and setting up traps for survival, and she went on to make it back home to Nome to return to her son. Next up, we have the Black men and women polar explorers of the 19th and 20th century. Pictured here is Matthew Henson, born August 8, 1866 in Maryland. Matthew Henson was a craftsman, navigator, trader, Arctic explorer, publisher, master of Inuit language, U.S. Customs clerk, and in 1909 he became the first African American to step foot on the geographic North Pole, an expedition led by himself, 4 Inuit assistants, and Robert Peary. He participated in 7 voyages to the Arctic and completed 6. He was the only non-Inuit who was skilled at driving dog sleds and training dog teams in the Inuit traditional way. In 1912, he published his memoir, A Negro Explorer at the North Pole. He became the first African American accepted as a member to the Explorers Club in 1937 and receiving the highest status as an honorary member to the club in 1948. He was honored in 1955 by both U.S. Presidents Harry S. Truman and Dwight D. Eisenhower. Henson received recognition for his achievements in polar exploration much later in life. This was due in large part to his race as an African American. It wasn't until the end of the 20th century that Mr. Henson's achievement of being the first African American in exploration of the North Pole was more recognized. Mr. Henson is most remembered as a very resourceful man who had an undisputable love for the Inuit people. George W. Gibbs Jr., born November 7, 1916 in Florida, was a U.S. Navy mess attendant, gunner, chief petty officer, civil rights activist, business leader, and member of the Admiral Richard Byrd's 3rd expedition to Antarctica. After joining the Navy, Gibbs was one of hundreds of applicants to become one of 40 to sail to Antarctica. At the time, only the lowest ranking positions were available to the several African Americans and other minorities serving on board the ship. From 1939 to 1941, Gibbs cooked for the crew and performed other tasks as mess attendant. He was occasionally assigned other duties in support of science, where he would capture penguins to bring to the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. He was the first African American in 1940 to reach the continent of Antarctica via the Ross Ice Shelf. He helped establish the U.S. West Base in Antarctica, also known as Little America 3. He was commended for outstanding zeal and energy, and for the unusual spirit of loyalty and cooperation which he invariably displayed under trying conditions. In 1959, George W. Gibbs Jr. earned a Bachelor's of Science in Education at the University of Minnesota and worked at IBM in Rochester, Minnesota for the last 20 years, and later founded his own employment agency. He also was active in civil rights organizations where he co-founded the NAACP chapter in Rochester and was involved in chapters in North Dakota. On September 2nd, 2009, the Antarctic Peninsula was named for Mr. Gibbs as Gibbs Point in his honor. Pictured here is Barbara Hillary, born June 12, 1931 in New York City. Barbara Hillary was a nurse by profession with degrees from the New School in New York City, an activist, publisher, explorer, and motivational speaker. She founded organizations such as the Aberdeen Action Association to improve life in the Aberdeen neighborhood of Far Rockaway in New York City, Queens. She also founded and was editor-in-chief of a pioneering nonprofit multiracial magazine known as the Peninsula Magazine. She became the first African American woman to reach the North Pole in 2007 at age 75, and became the first African American woman to reach the South Pole in 2011 at the age of 79, making her the first African American woman to simultaneously reach both poles within 4 years of each other. She was also a two-time cancer survivor, and when she learned that no Black woman had been to the North Pole, she began training and raising funds for her own expedition. She fell in love with the beauty of polar landscapes and came to understand the effects of climate change on the planet. In her final years of her life, she spent her time advocating for those impacted by climate change. Here is Lugi Nuchi, born in Msinga, South Africa. She is a sailor, explorer, and climate change activist. She began sailing to overcome her fear of the ocean, and in 2018 she became the first African woman to sail to the North Pole in an Arctic expedition. She advocates for ocean health and climate change issues, and her interest in polar research stems from trying to tailor the climate change, plastic pollution message to ordinary people like herself, and to show the world the importance of the polar regions and how what happens in the polar regions doesn't stay in the polar regions, but affects everyone on the planet. Here are a list of resources for further reading on the Indigenous and Black African polar explorers I mentioned here in this presentation: Ada Blackjack, Barbara Hillary, Matthew Henson, George W. Gibbs Jr., Lugi Nuchi. And this list certainly isn't exhaustive, but it includes some of my favorites, where you can find more information on women in the Arctic and Antarctic, women in polar science, minorities in polar research through Polar Impact, and a few blogs that were written by the National Geographic and others on Matthew Henson and Lugi Nuchi. Pictured here to the right is an image of 3 Barbies that I have acquired in my adult life. The first is the Arctic Barbie, and in the lower left-hand corner is the Arctic Eskimo Barbie, and in the top left-hand corner is the African American marine biologist research scientist Barbie that was made in 2019 by Mattel. I think that these would make a great addition to any kid's toy accessory, and I'm glad that I was able to purchase these in my adult life. I certainly didn't have them when I was a child, and the Eskimo Barbie and the Arctic Barbie should be available. They can be found on eBay. The African American Barbie, I think, is widely accessible, probably via Amazon and also via Mattel website. So I think that these would make, again, great additions to any kids toy accessory playset. And I thought that I would just share this photo with you all because I am very proud of my 3 Barbies, and I'm very glad that I have them in my life, and that I could add them to my collection of polar and Arctic accessories. I'd like to take a moment to recognize and acknowledge Native American Heritage Month, which is this month of November 2020. And I'd also be remiss if I did not recognize and acknowledge International Inuit Day, November 7th, Indigenous Peoples Day of October 12th, domestic and international Indigenous peoples of the world, and all Arctic Indigenous peoples, U.S. Black History Month in February, African and African American History, African Diaspora, and all Indigenous and people of color defending the sacred and protecting the Arctic, the Antarctic, and various environments. The wisdom, courage, and bravery are bestowed upon the world through Indigenous traditional knowledge, exploration, storytelling, poetry, art, music, formal and informal discussions. We are forever indebted to them for taking care of these vast lands and speaking truth to power. Thank you for sticking with me through my presentation. I'm sorry I couldn't be there live to do this recording, but if you have any questions about anything or would like to talk with me more in depth about any concepts or topics that may be of interest to you, you can reach me via email. That's aikenkimberly@hotmail.com, and feel free to check out my blog for the Center for the Blue Economy and the article that I wrote, first published with the Arctic Institute, on Trailblazer in the Arctic, a tribute to the first African American to reach the both poles, which is a tribute to Barbara Hillary and her achievements. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so yeah, that was really interesting, and yeah, thank you to for Kimberly for pre-recording that and giving us some more hidden knowledge. And so next we have Dr. Nikhil Mistry, who is an acoustical engineer and current researcher at the National Oceanographic Centre at Southampton. And he's working on developing a sonar system to see animals that live within the floors of our ocean using sound. He's interested in the many ways that sound and vibration play a role in our everyday lives. And aside from his research, he creates online audio and video content. And you'll be able to, we'll link you to his YouTube details afterwards. So Nikhil's talk will answer the question, what is acoustical engineering? He'll discuss the different jobs an acoustic engineer does, and we'll also talk about his specialist field of underwater acoustics and the interaction between sound and underwater bubbles. So over to you, Nikhil. And Nikhil is live.
Hi there, thank you very much for having me. I will just share my screen. So hopefully everyone can see everything here. So yeah, my name is Nikhil, Nick for short, and I am a researcher in acoustics. So I'm interested in underwater sound specifically, but I did my degree in acoustical engineering. And actually, when I was a school student, I didn't know what acoustics was. I kind of stumbled into this degree thinking it might be something cool, and I discovered so much more. So what I'd like to do today is talk a bit more about acoustical engineering, what you can do within it, and some of the cool stuff that I've done and that other people have done in acoustics. So I study and work at the Institute of Sound and Vibration Research. That's based in Southampton, in the UK. And yep, as I was introduced, I work at the National Oceanography Centre as well. And together we do some projects on stuff to do with underwater sound. And my current project is all about using sound to see in places where it's hard to use light. And I'll talk a bit about that later. But first, I'll introduce acoustical engineering. So what is acoustical engineering? Well, in my words, engineering is using science to solve real world problems. And the term acoustics refers to sound and vibration. So what we're doing is we're trying to solve real world problems where sound and vibration is concerned. So the first thing we do is we want to understand the fundamentals of sound and vibration. What that means is we want to understand mathematically how sound travels, how vibrations are created and how they travel, and understand the physics that underpins their fundamentals. So if we can understand sound and vibration, how they travel and what they do in different materials, we can then start to think about how they affect humans. So we think about loud sounds or annoying sounds or disturbing sounds when you're trying to sleep and you live near an airport or a railway station. Or the vibrations, do they create motion sickness in transport? And if we know how they affect humans, the question after that we ask is, can we control it? Can we control these unwanted vibrations or unwanted sounds? And so that comes back to the sort of mathematical and physics fundamentals that we need to understand. And if we can control it, we can then look at, can we use this to our benefit? And one really good example of this whole chain of understanding the fundamentals, how they affect humans, how to control, and how to use to our benefit is medical ultrasound. So we would understand the maths and physics of how sound travels through human tissue, liquids, other things like blood, other organs. Then we look at, if sound is traveling through them, does it harm the tissue? And under which circumstances will it harm it? And then that leads on to, okay, can we control that sound so it never gets past that threshold of harming the human body? And if we can control it, then let's see how we can manipulate it to use to our benefit. So we can use that sound to see things like babies in the womb, or even diagnose muscular injuries and things like that. We can also do some cool new stuff that's more recent, which is looking at an alternative to radiotherapy. So we can use that ultrasound to burn tumors in the body. We can get really tight accuracy with that. So that's an example of using the benefit. Now, there are other things an acoustical engineer does. And one example is engineering the sound and vibration associated with vehicles. So can we reduce the vibration inside the car? Can we make it more comfortable for the passengers and the driver in the car? Also, can we dampen the sound that comes in and out of the car? So when the wheels are rolling on the road, they vibrate the car. Can we reduce that vibration to make it more comfortable? Or if there's loads of sounds outside of the car, can we reduce the amount of sound that comes into the car by putting padding in the middle of the door panels? Can we also reduce the sound from the stereo in the car going outside and disturbing other people? Even more novel is changing the way the car sounds so that you as the driver are not alerted. And the reason I bring this up is because more and more cars are now working on a principle where only a few of the cylinders in the cars might operate under certain modes of operation. So if you're driving slowly and steadily, you might only be using 3 cylinders in the car's engine when you might have 4 or 6 maximum. Now, if you only use a few, that could change the way the engine sounds. And you as a driver will hear that and might start changing the way you drive because of that response. So an acoustical engineer will design a system so that the sound never changes and alerts you, so that you keep driving the way you are to improve your efficiency or the economy of the car. An acoustical engineer will most certainly be involved in designing performance spaces or any space. For example, in a school, if you ever notice that there are some funny plasterboard panels above you on the ceiling, those have a function to absorb sound so that when a teacher is speaking at the front of the classroom, the student at the back doesn't get these echoes where the sound goes from the teacher's mouth to the ceiling and back down to the back of the classroom. That means the student at the back can hear just as clearly and intelligibly as the person at the front. Or a more obvious example is a concert hall. An acoustical engineer will look at designing a concert hall to get the best out of the space, or put in materials and objects and different designs so that the room responds perfectly for the type of music that's meant to be played in there to give the best experience for the audience. As we mentioned with medical ultrasound, acoustical engineers are involved in medical physics, whether it's signal processing, understanding the signals that come from the human body, whether it's our electrical nervous impulses or monitoring heart flow, blood flow for the human, or medical ultrasound and scanning babies in wombs or muscles, or in the other case I mentioned, cancer treatment. And that ultrasound knowledge can transfer to the oceans. So we can use our knowledge of ultrasound and marine mammals in biology to study the health of the ocean. We can use sound to monitor how these animals are living. We can understand how they communicate and echolocate. But we can also understand how this noise made from humans, like ships and underwater construction, is interfering with the way these animals live. So we can start to understand how we're imposing a problem on their environment and look at how we can reduce that. We also have audiologists. Audiologists are the health science side of our department. And so they're looking at how humans hear, how they can be impaired in their hearing. They can look at deaf patients and also understand how we can improve hearing for certain patients. So we can do this in one way with cochlear implants. So if the organs in the human hearing system aren't working correctly, we can have an electrical system to do that for them. And this is where an audiologist comes in. But we can also look at other ways of improving hearing. So some new stuff that's come out recently is we can create vibrations on the patient's wrists, which matches the beat at which someone is speaking to help them focus on the person they're trying to listen to. And you normally would struggle hearing them because they have a hearing impairment. Now the vibrations will be an extra bit of information to help them. We also do some stuff in audio, of course, as an acoustical engineer looking at sound, loudspeakers, and that kind of technology would be right up our street. And so now we're looking at technology that can make more immersive audio experiences. So now instead of just having stereo left and right sound, we can look at 3D sound just from speakers in front of you. We can create the impression that a bumblebee is right behind you, or a car is really driving from left to right and it makes you turn your head even though you're not there. And the future of this could be that we could record sound at a festival or some other event, and you could listen to it at home and have a much more immersive experience, making you feel like you were really there. So it's like another level up from surround sound, even more accurate to give you the impression that you're really there. A good way to get this kind of feeling already is to go on YouTube and type in things like binaural haircut. Binaural is spelled B-I-N-A-U-R-A-L. You have to listen to these with headphones. It doesn't work with normal speakers. It's got to be with headphones. And you'll get that really accurate sensation that someone is actually cutting your hair. And the last bit here is about acoustical engineers making airplanes quieter. And we've been working on making planes quieter and quieter over the last 50, 60 years, and we have certainly made them quieter. But now we want to look at redesigning the airplane. Can we change the shape of it to make it even quieter than it is before, and therefore even more efficient? So some of the engineers in our department are researching different shapes of airplane wings, the shape of the plane itself, or even just acoustic treatment, so absorption of treatment around the engines to make them much quieter. So those are just a few examples of what we do, and we do even more than that. And if you want to learn more, you can go to our website here, and I'll show this website at the end as well. And if there are any of you looking at degree or career options, there's information here. If you're doing your GCSEs or A-levels, you can certainly go to this website and look at the courses that we do. So I did the Acoustical Engineering course and then did a PhD at the department in underwater acoustics. So I work in underwater acoustics, and one of the first things I learned about when I was studying this stuff was about this really cool experiment in the 90s where they met up at this island called Heard Island. It's in the South Indian Ocean, and the land is occupied by the British Antarctic Survey. And actually, if you wanted to visit there now, you still have to be part of the British Antarctic Survey to be able to access the island. And they made sounds from here in the water. And the type of sounds they made were low frequency, really low pitched sounds. And the reason they did that is because low pitched sounds travel further than high pitched sounds in the water and in air or any material, because low frequencies don't get absorbed as easily as high frequencies. And for this same reason, marine mammals like humpback whales could communicate to each other when they're on other sides of the planet, opposite sides of the planet, because the low frequency sounds, even like here, can travel really, really far. And actually the speed of sound in water is more than 4 times faster than it is in air. So you combine those two and you can really pick up sounds quickly when you're far, far away. So they made these sounds from Heard Island. And at these red dots, there were listening locations. And what they were doing was they were listening to the sounds from this location here. They were short pulses. And they wanted to measure how quickly they would receive those pulses. Now let's take this location here at the southern tip of Africa. They would compare the time it took to get those pulses constantly across the year for numerous years. So this location, you would hear the low sounds, ping, 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 and they would listen to those. And they'd measure how long it takes to arrive. And over the years, they would measure, or they would compare whether the time got slower or faster over the years. And what that meant was they could start to look at the warming of the ocean. And you might be thinking, how do you do that? Well, the speed of sound not only depends on the material it's traveling through, but the temperature of it. And as the temperature goes up, the speed of sound goes up. So if the sounds were getting to this location quicker and any other location, if they were getting to them much faster over the years, they could infer that the temperature of the ocean was getting higher. So this is called acoustic thermometry. And they thought, why don't we try it somewhere else? So they tried it in the Arctic. Now, the trickiest thing about the Arctic is that it's not really easy to deploy loads of people and loads of equipment somewhere. There's nowhere really safe or secure to do that. So there's all these stars I've got on this diagram here. Those stars were autonomous acoustic sources. That means they were unmanned sound devices making sound. So they just plonk them in the water or drill them down somewhere deep below, and they would make sounds. And then these black dots and these circles here as well, they were listening. And they did some experiments and they found the same results as they did in the previous Antarctic experiments, that the sounds were getting there much quicker. So they were already in the 90s measuring an increase in ocean temperatures. But this one isn't quite as easy because it was such a hostile environment and hard to deploy loads of equipment and crew. And it's for the same reason that we don't get as many marine mammal species as you might have seen from the previous speaker in the Antarctic. In the Arctic, you won't get as many because it's too cold and it's not as easy to live around there. So usually you'd have animals migrating past it to get to somewhere else. And it's also a very tricky environment to listen to things underwater because you have a thick ice shelf. You get loads of reflections from sounds underwater. Where the sounds are made underwater, they travel up to the ice and they get reflected back down. So if we wanted to listen to sounds here, not only would we be trying to listen to stuff from this acoustic source and this acoustic source and this one, we'd also be hearing all the life that's going on underneath and all the reflections from the ice. So it's a very tricky environment around here. But one thing I'm trying to do is, much like medical ultrasound, I'm trying to use this sound source to look at things that live at the bottom of the ocean. So in this case, this gets used, this makes sound, and it also listens to the reflections of the sound in the body to see a baby. Well, in my case, I would have a different version of this that's waterproof and can go down to great depths. And instead of scanning a human body, I'd be scanning the sediment or the floor of the ocean. And this image, instead of a baby, I would have an image of the sediment and I'd be looking deep into the ground. I'd see how far the sound can travel through the sand and the mud at the bottom of the ocean and come back up. And those reflections I can use to turn into an image just like medical ultrasound. This is the same way dolphins use sound to find fish and other little objects when they're clicking away. We're doing a very similar thing to be able to see things in the water. Now you might think, why do we care about animals that live inside the floor of the ocean? Well, whatever they're doing affects the chemistry of the water immediately above it. And the chemistry of that water then affects the bigger animals that live in the water. And then their life affects the transfer of chemicals and other matter between the water and the air above. And that in turn affects all of us. So everything is connected. And so what we want to do is be able to take this equipment that I make like this, but a big version, and deploy it anywhere. For example, in the Arctic, we could deploy this and scan over years and study the little animals that live in the bottom when nobody has been able to see them before, because it's such a hard environment to monitor it. So we could leave this scanning for a year by itself, and it could tell us some things. It could create images like this, maybe every few seconds, every few minutes, maybe even every day or so. And we can see if it changes, while also monitoring the quality of the water and the ground, looking at how climate change might be affecting their behavior. But I also said I study bubble acoustics. That seems like a weird thing. Well, actually, bubbles are like bells. Little ones make high-pitched sounds and big ones make low-pitched sounds. And you can do a test at home. If you open up a fizzy drink, there's lots of tiny bubbles and they make a high-pitched fizz. And if you blow a straw through water, you can hear low-pitched gurgling. And that's because they're bigger bubbles. And because of this relationship between bubbles and sound, we can do lots of cool things. Bubbles can make sound, they can reflect sound like real objects in the water. They can also absorb sound. One thing we're going to do is look at an experiment that I've put on YouTube. And you can find this video at home if you want to watch later, but let's go through it here now. Bubbles. What seems such inert, naturally occurring phenomena have quite the powerful relationship with sound. Bubbles can generate, absorb, and re-radiate sound. Here's an experiment you can do at home to show how bubbles can slow down the speed of sound. Here, I am making a cup of coffee using instant powder and water boiled from a kettle. Listen as I tap the base of the mug and see if you notice anything different or anything changing as I'm tapping. Have another. I'm just going to pause there and I want to guide you through what maybe you should have heard. Hopefully you heard the pitch rising as I was tapping the mug more and more before mixing it again. So you might hear something like I'm going to play it again and hopefully you'll hear that now that I've sort of prompted that. Listen. Do you notice how the pitch of the sound from the tapping rises over time? Why does that happen? Is it the powder, the water, or maybe it's the mug? The answer relates to bubble acoustics and is more affectionately known as the hot chocolate effect. Why does water bubble when it's boiling? It's because there is air dissolved in the water and it comes out of solution when the water gets hot enough and forms bubbles. You can watch our other video about the science of sound associated with boiling water in a kettle by clicking on the link above. When we mix the coffee granules with the boiled water, we get bubbles forming at the solid particles, and some of those bubbles rise quickly and form the foam at the top. If we were to tap the base of the glass at intervals during the time it takes for all the other bubbles to rise, we get that rise in pitch. I can stir the liquid in the glass to reintroduce the bubbles from the top back into the main body of liquid and start the process over again. One way of calculating the speed of sound is to multiply the frequency of a sound wave by its wavelength. We use C to represent the speed, F for the frequency, and the Greek letter lambda for the wavelength. The tone of the sound is generated by the liquid and the length of the column of it in the glass. the speed of sound in water is more than 4 times faster than the speed in air. After we've mixed up the granules and created all the bubbles, there are lots of compressible air pockets in the liquid. This causes the speed of sound in the liquid to decrease. As time passes, those buoyant bubbles start to rise to the top. This makes the liquid in the glass clearer, with fewer compressible pockets in it. This increases the speed of sound. If the column of liquid doesn't change, neither does the wavelength. However, the speed of sound does change. Therefore, it is the frequency that must change in order to balance the equation, which we observe as a rise in the pitch of sound. Why not send us a video of you trying this experiment in your home? You can tweet us at ISVR Southampton. Have fun! So that's something you could try at home. All we need is a kettle to boil water, some instant coffee, and a clear space to do the experiment. Now, obviously, be careful if you're using hot water. Just keep your hands clear so you don't burn yourself. Now, this phenomenon that we see, that fact that bubbly water was slowing down the speed of sound, well, humpback whales have used this to their advantage for many years. You may have seen on some Blue Planet or David Attenborough videos footage of humpback whales hunting together and lunging out from the water together, grabbing balls of fish. Here's some footage here.
The inlets echo to the sound of a mysterious song. A curtain of bubbles and a haunting call hold the secret to an ingenious way of fishing.
This sound you hear, these humpback whales only ever make this sound when they're hunting.
This is bubble net feeding.
So let's have a look at an aerial shot of those bubbles. In this video, we can see the bubbles being formed in a spiral, this net of bubbles. The fish are in the middle. And what happens, much like that coffee mug, those bubbles cause the speed of sound to slow down wherever the bubbles are. So there's this spiral of lower speed of sound. Now you've got all these whales here, but outside around here, I don't know if you can see the shadow, there'll be a humpback whale, and it makes a sound in the direction of the bubbles. When that sound gets into the bubbles, because it's a slower speed of sound, the sound gets trapped in the bubbles and cannot travel anywhere else into the clear water. So the sound bends around this chamber. What that means is when the fish try and get out of this net, they don't have a problem swimming through bubbles, but it's the loud sound that they hear. So the fish try and swim out and they get scared by the loud sound. So they school together in the middle, which makes it easier for all those whales to come up underneath and gobble them up. And they can catch tons of fish a day doing this method. Now, the fact that we can use bubbles to trap sound and absorb sound, we can use this in construction. So if we've got something like a pile driver going into the bottom of the floor and making loud sounds, we can create a bubble net around it to stop the sound trying to get out and disturbing marine life elsewhere. So this is kind of like the things I showed you at the beginning of the talk, where we looked at the maths and physics of how sound travels. And in this case, we looked at the mathematical and physical relationship between sound and bubbles. We thought about how it might affect, actually, in this case, marine mammals outside. We looked at how we can control it. And in this case, our benefit is that we can trap the sound in. So that was just a short example about acoustical engineering, the underwater acoustics and the bubble acoustics that I've been involved with. But as you can see from this poster, there's all sorts of stuff we can get involved with, whether it's looking at noise cancelling headphones up here or cochlear implants down here, looking at the future of loudspeaker technology over here, recording studio design and 3D audio, looking at signals given by the brain by looking at different ways of measuring that, underwater acoustics and listening to marine mammals, and my favorite, bubble acoustics. There's all sorts of things you can get involved with in acoustical engineer. And in fact, this year was supposed to be a big year for us because it's the International Year of Sound. Unfortunately, coronavirus has stopped us from going out and running events, but there are all sorts of pieces of, you know, acoustic gold out there on the internet that you can look at. And for example, you can go on our website here to learn more about understanding acoustics and studying it and working in it. You can follow us at Twitter at ISVR Southampton. You can follow me on Twitter to learn more as well. And if you type in ISVR Southampton in YouTube, you can find our channel as well. And on that channel, there will be loads of other content, which I could direct you to now, where we've got playlists about the science of sound, the stuff we invent, but also the ISVR shed, where I've put loads of experiments that you can try at home, including how to make a whistle out of a carrot. We know we were always told not to play with our food. So head over to our YouTube channel and try some of those experiments and maybe tweet us with your results. I'll go back to this and I'll leave you with the closing page there with some information. And I'll be here now to stick around for a bit for to answer some questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for that, Nikhil. Really brilliant. And yeah, the place in Southampton looks really interesting. I'm sure people will be interested to find out more about that, about those careers, and maybe visiting, like you said, when we're able to and things go back to a new normal. So we have lots of questions that have come in, but we're gonna, due to time, we're gonna focus on 5 questions. And I'm going to begin with the first question, which is actually for Natty, and it's like 2 questions merged together. And I'm going to call Natty because we're having trouble of him taking part in the Zoom properly, so that he can respond via a telephone call. So the question, I know you can hear this, Natty, is this information, it's from Catherine Evans, and she says that this information appears to be hidden. Why isn't Black exploration common knowledge? And then the other part of that question is, where is Equiano's plaque located? So I'm calling in now, and Natty, I'm going to put you on loudspeaker so people can hear your response to that.
Sergeant?
Hi, Natty. So I think that everybody should be able to hear you if you respond to the question that I had just asked. Did you catch the question?
Oh no, hold on, because I'm still listening to okay, hold on, I'm just listening to let me turn them up. Okay, sorry, no, I didn't. Sorry, I was still listening to the
okay. So Natty, the question is, the comment and question is that some of what you talked about appears to be hidden. Why isn't the history of Black explorers more common knowledge? And then the other part of that is, where is Equiano's plaque located, if you know the answer to that?
Okay, I'll deal with the plaque. So the plaque, which is shown in the amongst the imagery, that's in St. Margaret's Church in Westminster. So that's where he was baptized while he was enslaved. Mm-hmm. But there are 2 other plaques, one in Riding Street and one in Tottenham Street. So altogether in London, there's actually 3 plaques. So one, kind of commemorates his baptism, and the other 2 are places where he lived. And the one in Riding Street is where he wrote his autobiography.
Okay.
Now, concerning the exposure, I think at that time, the wide world wasn't ready to recognise that heroism that we possessed, the same as any other, culture has. Even when we talk about Washington Gibbs, George Washington Gibbs, or even Henson has spent something like 20 years traversing the Arctic with Peary. I think it's about 7 expeditions they took together, and when they took the accolade of being the first, in Antarctica, and kind of cold-shouldered him. He wasn't ready to stand up and say, look, this man has been by my side for all these expeditions, blah blah blah. So at that time, the wide world wasn't ready to recognise that achievement.
Yeah. But of course, the work that you do, Natty, brings, and other people too, brings that out. So that's excellent. And it's something that we'd like to, now we know about that part of his story, because like you said in your talk, that more of the other massive, obviously, achievements have maybe overshadowed this part. And so maybe we should have a bit of a focus on this a bit more going forward. Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Natty. I'm going to move to another question now, and it's for Nikhil. Why does sound travel faster in water? And that question is from Imran.
The speed of sound depends on a few factors. Things like the density of the material it's traveling through, the compressibility, so how squishy that material is, or the temperature. So let's think about air and water. The particles in air are much further apart than they are in water. And sound is essentially a vibration that's transmitted from those particles. In air, you've got all these particles everywhere, and there's loads of spaces between them. In water, those particles are much closer packed. And in a solid, they're really closely packed together. And think of a Mexican wave, or playing it or tag or something like that, right? It takes longer for one person to tag the next person if they're further apart. Same thing in air. The vibration of one air particle takes longer for that particle to transfer the energy to the next particle because it's further away. In the same way, for water, it needs to transfer the vibration, but because they're closer together, it can transfer it a lot quicker. Therefore, the speed of sound is quicker. Those vibrations can travel through faster. So everything starts as a vibration, and you know this because if you look at a loudspeaker or a wobbly ruler off the edge of a table, it vibrates, and then you hear the sound. So all sound starts as a vibration, and so it travels through water faster because the particles are more closely packed.
Excellent. So we have another question for you as well. So what subjects are best to study at GCSE and A-level to get into acoustics at degree level?
So at least for our degree, at A-level, you need to have at least maths. That's really important. Physics will really help you. And then the third could just be, I guess, anything else. It's so often people will call us sound engineers, and actually that's a misconception. Sound engineers are people. It's usually reserved for people who work on a stage or in performance, and they're the ones arranging and designing and mixing the microphones, loudspeakers, and things like that. We are thinking about changing, the whole acoustics community are thinking about changing the name of the degrees and stuff to make it more accessible. But really, we are acoustical engineers. We are studying sound and vibration. So really the important thing, like I said, the first pillar of acoustics is understanding the fundamentals. So it's really important you have maths as an A-level, which means you'd need to do maths at GCSE to get the maths A-level. And physics would be really useful. For me, when I chose my degree, I didn't really know what I wanted to do at university. I was really quite confused. Then I sort of realized I wanted to do engineering. And so for A-levels, I ended up doing maths, physics, English, literature, and Spanish, which is a weird mix. But in my head, I thought a language, a maths, a science, and English, they're kind of like the core. So I thought I could go anywhere with that. And in the end, I chose acoustics. But yeah, maths is really important. But it's always worth, like, if you're interested, contacting our department and just asking us about requirements, because we're quite flexible and welcoming to any person as long as they have that passion or that spirit or commitment.
Okay, excellent. So, and that question was from Paula, just to say. And then a question from Mia is, do any of the deep underwater tests impact the wider environment, like the weather or sea animals?
Yeah, so when we run these experiments, we really have to consider the environmental impact. And most projects, not just our acoustic experiments, but anything that goes on in the world, whether you're building a new railway or having a new airplane runway or doing these experiments, you have to run an environmental impact assessment. You have to think about how you're going to affect the people and the other wildlife around you. So of course, when you make these sounds underwater, you have to think about, are we going to disturb any animals? Is this going to intrude with their life? And so actually, as the years pass by, we gain more and more understanding of these animals. So then we can understand actually where our limitations lie. As far as those sounds that the experiments I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, as far as they're concerned, they believe they didn't disturb any animals. They're short pulses that aren't within the range, or they're not, the types of pulses they used aren't going to be used by other animals for communication. So those animals shouldn't get confused. Actually, things like shipping noise and construction, they can be really disturbing. And that's where you end up getting animals that are lost or stranded or worse, caught, dead on the beach, beached whales and dolphins, because they can't communicate with their partners and their family, because these loud sounds from ships are disturbing them.
Yeah, that's a really interesting part of in terms of impact on the environment, including everything that lives within it, that we may not really think about. Yeah, just this is a question from me now. You know, you talked about Heard Island.
Yeah.
How do we spell herd? Is it heard?
Yeah, literally like Heard. So like as if you heard it. That's what it is. I think.
And was it named? Sorry.
I don't know. I don't actually know. All this time I've never looked it up. That like why they named it that. But yeah, it was in the early 90s they did it, and yeah, there's quite a chance that they named it. They chose that island because it was uninhabited, and they decided to call the island after that. If someone knows, they should.
Okay, we can find that out. Yeah, and also yeah. And a lot of the things that you mentioned as well, I'll come back to you afterwards so that we can share those things, including obviously your YouTube information, and also, what did you call it? Was it the
binaural? So
binaural, yeah.
Yeah, in fact, if I share my screen, I could probably just show you some results on YouTube, if you'd like.
Yeah. And while you're doing that, I'm going to read out another question, and this is from Daryl Dunn in California. We hear a lot, actually, it's a mixture of two questions I'm going to mix here. We hear a lot about light therapy and the use of light in health. How can sound be used to improve our health? And then that links to Daryl's question, which is the difference, what's the connection or the difference between sound and light in terms of speed and that kind of thing?
So to answer that last bit, light travels almost 1 million times faster than sound in air, which is why when you have a storm, you see the lightning first and then you hear it later. The sound and the light originated from the same location. It just took longer for the sound to get to you because it travels so much slower. The rule of thumb is usually if there's a 5-second delay between the lightning and you hearing the thunder, the storm's about a mile away. That's usually the rule of thumb. And that's because in air, sound travels 330 meters a second, and light travels 300 million meters a second. So if you use 330 meters a second, 5 seconds is almost 1.6 kilometers, which is approximately a mile. So if you hear the thunder at the same time as you see the lightning, the storm's right above you. So which means the distance is so close you can't tell the difference between the light and sound getting to you at different times because it's such a tiny delay. So that explains the speeds of light and sound. In terms of therapy and well-being with sound, I think it's really subjective or relative. So, one sound could be annoying for one person, but it could be perfectly fine for another. And that relates to our cultures and our upbringing. one way I think about it is in East Asian cooking, there are different flavors and textures that are celebrated, which the Western world might consider gross, right? I mean, where some people may not like chicken's feet here, but actually, you know, people fight over chicken's feet. And it's the same thing for acoustics, for sounds. A sound that I might be used to and enjoy might not be enjoyable for another. For the same reason we have different genres of music. You can certainly use sound for healing and well-being. There are things like binaural beats and stuff. I don't know too much about that side of things, but I know that there are things out there that can help. I mean, we have things like ASMR. So those various sounds that are soothing for the body. I forget what it is. I think it's like auto-stimulatory meridian response. I cannot remember the abbreviation for ASMR, but there's like all these nice sounds that people like to hear and it makes them feel calmer. This thing called binaural beats, I think you have pulses that you hear at different frequencies, and the thought is that they might match the rate of nervous impulses that are associated with calmness in your mind, so they can encourage you to feel calmer and soothe you. When we're babies, I think they're encouraged to hear like pink noise or white noise because it emulates the kind of acoustic environment in the womb, so it helps a baby feel calmer. So yeah, there's a whole variety of things, but I couldn't prescribe anything because I wouldn't know.
Yeah, it gives us more things to look into going forward of what we might explore further, because it's also fascinating. I'm going to bring Natty in again, who's on loudspeaker. Hi, Natty, you okay? Yeah. I just wanted to ask you what you thought about some of what Kimberly covered in her talk. Was there anything, because you know you're the history guy, is there anything within what she talked about that was new to you or that stood out?
Oh yeah, sure. The two women who were involved in Arctic exploration in more recent times. A real eye opener. So it's good to hear about that, especially the woman who kind of, as part of her kind of reason for traveling, was to overcome her fear of the ocean. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's good to see people looking into the past, but who's doing this, who's engaging and doing work in those regions now is something we could do with knowing more about as well. Yeah, really important. So it's good to bring kind of our contribution to Arctic exploration into the contemporary scenario, to be honest. So good thanks to the speaker for that. Yeah, okay, great, thanks, Natty. So Nikhil, if you have a look in the chat there's some more another question that is for you.
Yep. Is this about what activities we can do to nurture our liking for acoustics? Yeah. So even at a young age, if you're really interested in acoustics, there are plenty of things you can find. So for example, a shameless plug, you can go on my YouTube channel. The department's YouTube channel that I put stuff on, but there should be museums worldwide that have these kind of things. I know in Southampton, just north of Southampton, there's a little city called Winchester, and they have a science centre. And I worked with them recently to redesign their whole upstairs, so it has a huge exhibit all about acoustics, including a massive 15-meter long guitar that you can play. There's a massive ear that you can climb through and learn about your ear and how it works. There's stuff about whales and how they communicate in the ocean, and about shipping noise and interfering with them. But various museums will have those kind of things. There are websites as well. So if I try, I think it's sound2020.org. I'll just check that for you. So if you type in sound2020.org, that's all about the International Year of Sound. And you can find some resources. I might just share my screen very quickly so you can see. So this is the website. So there's all this stuff here. There's all about the science of sound, sound and society. There's resources. Now some of the competitions might not be live now because of COVID. And then again, the thing I was talking about with the binaural, you just type in virtual barbershop, you have to wear headphones, because in our head, in the human body, the sound that goes to your left ear doesn't necessarily communicate with your right ear, and the same for your right ear and left ear. They don't cross talk. And with headphones, you can ensure that the sounds only go to the ears they're supposed to. And then you can also, you know, one of the best things is to follow like my department on Twitter. There's also the Acoustical Society of America. They're constantly posting cool stuff about safe noise levels to protect your hearing and other cool projects going on. And I think if really there's so much that really, if you're really stuck, I'm very happy to take, you know, messages. My passion is acoustics, and I want more people to know about that. And if people really want to get involved, that's my job done. That's like my life goal achieved. So message me, and I'm more than happy to make recommendations. Okay, well, that's excellent. You heard it there. Wouldn't waste the resource and the offer that comes from Nikhil. There's so much to explore there. Let's have a look. Okay. I think because of where we are with time, I think we're going to leave it there. But Nikhil, we will be coming back to you because, you know, it is Year of Sound, and we're particularly interested in that. We've been covering that for a little while as well, looking at reggae sound systems and working with Dr. Mark Richards around physicist. So I just want to thank you again. I want to thank Kimberly Aiken as well, and Natty Mark Samuels for your brilliant contributions today. Of course, the Antarctica Heritage Trust for funding the event, and also the Royal Academy of Engineering for us to weave in the engineering part as well. We will be editing out my mistakes and making the recording available. So sign up at our website, blastfest.org.uk. And a final point of the survey, which should be entered into the chat on YouTube, but also will be sent to everybody who registered. It's the British Science Association that will go to, who are distributing the funding for the Antarctic Heritage Trust. So one more person I want to thank who led me to Kimberly is Renuka Bade of the European Polar Board. And other than that, it's thank you to everybody for listening in, and to the Blastfest team, Helen, Kiki, Makeda, and others. And yeah, I think that's it. Thank you, Natty. You're still on the phone with me here. So yeah, respect to you too. Okay, so thank you, everybody, and look out for our next event. Thanks, Nikhil.
Bless you. Thank you. Respect.
Bye.
Thank you very much.